Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast.
So as we're talking about, is it time to shake up your recovery and your healing? As I think about that, I think way back to when I very first started to get into recovery seriously. And my first mentor, Dr. Paige Bailey, who was just an awesome, classy, world-renowned neuropsychologist, took me under his wing. I spent 3 or 4 years training under him, and he really tried to just make me an expert in all things addiction and the brain, right? What is going on in the brain? How does it work? I mean, he was just phenomenal. And out of that whole process came my first book, The Drug of the New Millennium, the brain science behind internet porn addiction. And that tells you how immersed I was in it and how far I had come. Here's the crazy part. After all of that, I'm an author. I've written a book about it. I was still in addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And right? Information is not the key. It doesn't matter how much you know, right? And here's the funny part. Well, I guess really not funny, kind of tragic if you really think about it. So I would have a relapse and I could give you a play-by-play recount of what happened in my brain, right down to the neuron, write down every chemical, how much of it had released, what happened in my nervous system. I could tell you all of it with absolute authority. And yet I was still relapsing.
Yeah.
That told me, you got to shake something up here, because just because you know all this stuff, it's not helping you recover or heal. And how many times do we see that?
Oh gosh, all the time, right?
Right?
That difference between knowledge and application, for sure. I know I've talked about that a lot here on the podcast too. It's we both have been guilty of hypocrisy of the highest order, for sure.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Lecturing clients on the benefits of sobriety while not being that ourselves.
Just sideline our wives for a little private conversation to talk about Mark and Steve's hypocrisy and duplicity. Right?
They would probably just rub their hands together and just say, "Where would you like to begin?"
Yeah, roll their eyes. It's very true. But it's easy for a lot of reasons to get into a place where your recovery or your healing are starting to stagnate. They're starting to slow down. Even I hear clients say, "I'm just stuck. We're just stuck. We're not making any progress."
Mm-hmm.
Or on the other side, it seems like they really kind of never get into the flow at all. There's a lot of ways that happens.
Well, and I think that, this stagnation process, it's disruptive on so many levels. Let's just be real. as a stagnator, as an instigator of stagnation, for different
like
reasons
that
in
term.
recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, it's frustrating for the people actually involved in the recovery process. It's frustrating for you and your spouse, but frankly,
Hmm.
it's frustrating with anybody else involved in your recovery as well. There have been too many times in both of our careers. I know we talked before this session where sadly we had to let clients go, and it's not because we even wanted to or because it was something that we enjoyed. It was because it was simply the right thing, right? Well, clients had either, for a lot of reasons, either maybe they had progressed with us just as far as they were able to,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
one reason. Another big reason is they just, they get caught kind of in this never ending pattern of they get too comfortable. It's a good way
Yep.
to put it,
They
right?
get comfortable, one, and here's the thing for those listening, a really important part for your continuing recovery and mine as clinicians is to stay in our honesty and authenticity. And when a client does come to that place and we're feeling it, to be honest enough for us to express it openly and in
Yes.
a very raw, real way, because it would be very easy to just sort of go along to get along, kind of keep things as they are,
Mm-hmm.
don't make waves. Sometimes we have to make waves and say, you know what, this just isn't working. Let me get you other help.
Yeah.
That's an important part of you and me staying healthy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Recovery works best when everybody in the recovery relationship, you, your spouse, your therapist, your sponsor, right? All those people are exhibiting the same communication traits.
Yep.
There's transparency, there's vulnerability, there's honesty, there's true love, which we talk about on here, right? Telling people what they need to hear versus what they want to hear. That all makes up a solid recovery plan. So there are a lot of things that lead to or that can contribute to the stagnation, right? Both causes and results. One, which is one of the scariest, is burnout, for sure.
Oh my gosh, yes.
If you're spending all your time, I've worked with too many couples who unfortunately will get to my office where they have spent really sincere, solid effort in the recovery process, but working on the wrong thing.
Mhm.
They're trying to work on step 5 of the process when they've skipped steps 1 through 4 for whatever reason, and they just spin their wheels and spin their wheels, and progress is really slow. They become discouraged, right? We kind of tap out, max out, and it just makes when we finally get on track that much harder. So that's definitely a risk. A big symptom or a common cause of stagnation can be a lack of commitment or follow through. Um,
Yes.
I know this will be gravitationally shocking, but addicts have a hard time keeping commitments, and
Yep. You think?
for a lot of different reasons. And spouses, even, from a trauma perspective, there's research to show reasons for that. Anything from memory loss to all sorts of things. And so, lack of commitment or follow through. You can have the best therapist, for example, on planet Earth, but if consistently week to week, he's not setting goals with you, which, by the way, if you're not getting goals each week in recovery, that's a real problem if you're in a therapy relationship.
Yeah.
But he or she's not giving goals, or you're not following through with them. Change is going to be minimal, and you're going to get stuck, and then all these other things start to build.
Yeah, so if you find yourself, and this is where self-awareness, mindfulness comes in, if you find that you're having a resistance with making commitments, if you're not wanting to follow through, right? If you're hemming and hawing and rolling your eyes when the next assignment comes,
Yeah.
it's a real signal to stop and step back and find out what's going on with this. Why is this the case?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, but there's the opposite side of that, not the lack of follow through necessarily, but recovery activities can actually become a way of avoiding the really deep,
Yeah.
uncomfortable emotional work. Well, I'm doing all these other things. I'm checking in, I'm going to meetings, I'm doing all of this stuff. And yet you're using that as sort of what would I say, a smoke screen to keep you from going to the really deep work, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It can happen in lots of really altruistic looking ways too, right? I've worked with guys who attend meetings like every day, but when the meetings, what do they focus on? They're giving feedback to all the other group
All
members who
the
are
other
there,
guys I know, right?
right? They're there, and the stuff they're saying is like really good, but they're not ever really. And it feels good because they're working recovery.
Yep.
but they're not really having to look at their
And I
stuff.
was so guilty of that, especially in those, like I said at the beginning, those early neuroscience days. Man, I could spout off so much impressive stuff that people would just sit and go, "Wow, how do you know all
Yeah.
this?" And I was not working recovery. Boy, I sure sounded like I was.
Yes. I know everything. Now give me space. I'm going to go act out. Yes.
Yes,
That's
right.
how we
I
did that
know.
too much.
I know, and it's just it's a deflection. It's an avoidance tactic.
Yeah.
It'd be so subtle because it feels like you're working it. I'm really working it.
Yes.
Well, are you?
Totally. Well, and a couple of these other points, right? They actually tie together. Like, for example, boredom, right? If we're talking about stagnation, sometimes it's just good old fashioned
Mm,
boredom. Even the most solid recovery programs need shakeups. You can be working the best program possible, but one, because your brain's going to get bored, but also just as importantly as recovery needs evolve. Your recovery plan needs to be evolving as well. You
yep.
need to be mixing it up. I tell my clients a good rule of. I had a client just the other day actually ask me like, so what does a good recovery plan look like? And we talked about a couple of specific options, some of the stuff we've talked about here on the podcast that we talk about in our D2C program. But then I kind of closed the discussion with that part of the discussion with the biggest thing that I've seen work in recovery is to make sure that you're doing something uncomfortable every day,
Yeah,
something that's stretchy. If recovery is comfortable, it's probably not eliciting the kind of change that you're wanting,
I
at
would
least for
agree.
currently.
Yep,
You
I
know.
would agree. Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, but oftentimes what do? We allow our emotional discomfort or our pain avoidance. Again, I know this is shocking that any of us would have pain avoidance,
Yeah.
but we allow those parts of our brain to override doing the actual emotional heavy lifting or doing a less vulnerable version of it, right? Or whatever the case is. And this plays out not just in recovery with one's individual self, it plays out with couples. For everybody listening, what subjects do you have out there that probably need to be talked about, but that you rarely, if ever, do?
Mm,
Right? You communicate so well in so many areas and so many facets, but there's like those three subjects that come up that it's like persona non grata. It's just like, no, you can't, it's really awkward or uncomfortable. And what do? Unless we're forced to look at them, we tend to avoid those things. And that sets us up for, stagnation as well as all sorts of stuff in recovery. That's not good.
and we get to the place in that where just activity for the sake of activity
Yes.
can start to take on the appearance of the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But really, we have to step back and we have to realize we're using it as a deflection or avoidance tactic. Well, but we're doing our couple check-ins every day. We've been doing them
Yes.
every day for 3 months. Well, but have you been really, like you said, but have you been checking in about these three topics?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
no, the other 73, but not those three.
Yeah. For all of you listening out there, Mark and I get it. We know recovery is tough stuff.
No kidding, man. We'd have given anything during those dark addiction years to have two seasoned professionals like us, to bounce stuff off of, to get advice, to get mentoring.
I know, right? That's why we've created the perfect program to guide addicts and spouses on their path to healing. For those listening today, there's no need for you to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to make the same mistakes we did.
Don't go it alone. We're in this together. To get started, visit daretoconnectnow.com.
Yeah, I know, and it's true, and this does speak to there's kind of another piece to the pie that brings up for me, and that is what I call reactive recovery versus proactive recovery.
Yes.
This is a whole. So this subject is so much bigger than any podcast episode. It's going to be gets kind of on my docket of one of the first things to cover in depth on our Dare to Connect program when we launch on May 1st. But but suffice it to say, if we give the real shortened version of that, right? Too many of the clients that I work with, both addicts and spouses, find themselves falling into a pattern of really busting tail in the recovery process, so to speak, when the heat is on.
Yeah.
But the minute it starts to dial down, again, we're reactive to that dialing down. And so we dial down with it. And what we
Yes.
end up with is this constant up and down cycle in the process where things look really good for a week or two, and then they go bad, and then they look good, and then they crash.
Mm-hmm.
And switching over to a proactive recovery is a huge part of avoiding stagnation. Rather than looking at your recovery process and saying, what boxes need to be checked? What if we tried looking at our recovery from what's one way I want to be better or different in this marriage today?
Mm-hmm.
And let's center
Yeah.
it around that.
Yep. And just stop the reactiveness and start doing with purpose
Yes,
and direction, right?
absolutely.
And and another thing you brought up was, I thought it's so we see this so much, is that we try, for example, to work on our marriage relationship without
Mm,
doing the deep work with regard to our trauma.
yes, yes,
And so it's like, it's like you're trying to work with each other to work on your sprinting when you're barely crawling. Why are we
yes.
having trouble with these sprints? Well, because you're still on your hands and knees.
Because of my torn ACL.
Yeah, because of you're crawling around in your trauma, and that very important critical work has not been happening. And so we'll see people try to go right to couples or marital counseling, and then it fails, which is so understandable. And then comes the hopelessness. Now what? We're
Yeah,
never going to make it. It's like, ooh, we need to take a bunch of steps back and start from the beginning, right?
yes.
We see that a lot. That will often, stagnate it or stop it in its tracks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just speaking a little bit more to that. It is very much true. Recovery from trauma and recovery from relationship issues, I believe firmly, can happen in tandem. Where things go wrong is when we try to, kind of like what you're saying, Mark, right? We overextend on the
Mm-hmm.
areas that require the foundational footing.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to do things in recovery that don't have the trauma recovery or the shame resiliency, frankly, chops to kind of back it up, and
Right.
ends up sabotaging all the time.
Yep.
Another component to this, and we've all got this. Everyone's got one of these in their recovery circle. If they're honest, there's always someone to ferret out. Having members of your recovery circle, your recovery support system. Let's do the G-rated version. This is a Christian podcast. This is not how I used to say it in my drug addiction recovery groups that I used to run, but for chemical addicts. But other people in your recovery circle co-signing on your bull crap.
Yes.
People who are always agreeing with you or reinforcing incorrect thinking, either because they don't want to confront or whatever the case is. And so I've worked with clients like this, and from a therapist's perspective, it's incredibly difficult because I'll introduce something interesting or uncomfortable or new, and he'll come back the next week and say he didn't do anything. And then he's like, well, I talked to my sponsor, and then I talked to these 3 guys in recovery. And
Uh-huh.
and obviously I'm not knocking on sponsors or guys in recovery at all. But if you're surrounding yourself with people that are just going to be yes men or yes women in your recovery, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Right. Or if you're surrounding yourself with people that are just going to stay in one rut,
Yes.
one particular way that they come at it,
Yeah.
and so I had a group way back when where we as guys just sat around and kind of turned into a wife bashing session.
Yeah.
All the things
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't doing and this and that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're getting completely off the track of why you're there and what it is that you're supposed to be looking at.
Yeah.
It'd be very easy to get into a myopic kind of group and circle, right? And so we get
Yeah.
into this place, then we say, okay, so how do we shake it up? How do we shake up our recovery and healing if we're finding that there's this stagnation or stuckness or progress is slowed down?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do you do?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. We've already identified some of these, so I'll just run through these real quick and then we'll wrap up. But, looking at the different areas of your recovery circle and really asking the hard questions, right? Kind of through the lens of what we've talked about today. Well, my sponsor, are we too buddy? My first sponsor fired my butt. And he straight up told me it's because I wasn't doing anything. I was just complaining all the time. And I hated his guts at the time. But I was so grateful for that, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with groups. You talked about that. Different skills or activities. Swap something out in your recovery. Mix it up. You know, I share with clients often. I'm very active in my faith tradition, but I've told even the leader of my congregation, much to his chagrin, I'm just very open about the fact that sometimes I mix it up and I just go for a hike instead of going to church.
Right.
Because that's what I need that day, you know? I don't need all the other dynamics coming with it. I just need to get close to God one-on-one. So that's just an example. Obviously, Mark, you talked about these therapists or recovery groups going stale or stagnant, and that can happen for lots of reasons, right? Therapists, not all therapists are created equal. Some are better at confronting, some not so much. Some maybe like me, maybe confront a little bit to a fault and are less sympathetic. I'm getting better at that. Mark is rubbing off on me. We're rubbing off on each other. So
We are.
but the big thing is going to be getting uncomfortable. So the assignment this week, right, is going to be look at your recovery regimen as it stands, okay, and pick the most quote unquote stale part of it, okay. Whichever thing that you've been doing, where if you're really honest with yourself, it's just tapered out in terms of what you're getting from it, and mix it up, right? Swap it out for one of the most avoidant or uncomfortable activities from your list where people have told you before to do, and you're like, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
Mix
and
it up.
this is for those in recovery, or if you're in betrayal trauma healing and you're finding yourself stagnating or being stuck, look at this as well.
Yes.
What are some ways you can shake it up and mix it up? Or there's some uncomfortable places that you've maybe been postponing or avoiding, that you need to look at? Are you perhaps, and we've talked about this, especially for spouses, are you not being selfish enough in your
Mm,
healing
mm-hmm,
efforts? And that sounds weird to say that, but there is a
mm,
place for really focusing on me, right? Sort of like being on the airplane, and the low oxygen warning goes off and the little masks pop out. Whose
yeah.
mask do you put on first?
Mm-hmm.
Yours, so that you can then help others. So, yeah, this applies to recovery and healing both. Where is an area where you can really start to mix it up and get uncomfortable and start to push through to new progress and, new horizons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree. As always, guys, we care about you. We appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions that you'd like addressed on the podcast, you're welcome to also contact us at our podcast website at pbsepodcast.com. We hope to hear from you soon and see you back on the battlefield.
Yep. See you next week.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.